Good morning.
Hi. Good morning or good afternoon for you, Ellu. Happy. Hey, we had a great chat with Sylvia Betancourt.
She told me
On Wednesday, whatever, singing your praises, of course.
Oh, she's so
Fabulous
great.
herself. Yeah, she's amazing.
She's awesome. And I actually did hear her and Mark do their seminar whenever that was a couple of months ago. So
Cool.
Yeah.
I think Rob is joining us soon. I don't know where he is, but so let's see. I think there's something like 50 odd people registered, so it sounds like we have a good crowd. I mean, who knows, there'll probably be a little fall off, but it'll be a pretty good group. And my hope is, given that size, is I'm going to ask them to put questions and thoughts in the chat during the conversation, and that maybe in the last 10 or 15 minutes we dive into them. If we can get to them quicker, that's great. And I'll try to monitor the chat, and I'm going to ask Rob to also to just kind of chime in on things that are sort of relevant. And if you all see something that you want to pick up, if you want to call on something, I think, the more, with 50 people, it's hard to be like totally normal and chill. But I would just say I'm all for like having a conversation and feeling like, we're sitting around the coffee table and these other people get to pull up a chair. And wherever we can get them in, because I think there'll be a bunch of knowledge and curiosity in the room that we, be cool to tap into. Yeah.
I got a question. So the hosts and panelists, if there's a chat, that's just us, right? These four, that's not seen by everyone.
Yes.
Okay.
So I don't know what and I'm hoping that Dominica, are you there?
Yes,
So where's Rob?
he is coming.
He said he was in the waiting room.
Yeah, but I don't see him. I don't know which one is you.
So here's the question.
Yes.
In chat, can people, will the participants be able to chat to us or to everyone? How does it work?
Yes, we're gonna have the QA session. Since we have a lot of people registered,
Yeah.
as a meeting would have been a little bit of a challenge. So it's gonna be, if you look at the bottom, you have the QA session. And I'm also gonna be able to let people speak.
Okay, great.
In case that they're gonna raise their hand, the attendees, whoever wants to ask questions.
Got it.
Because we are gonna have like 62 people registered today.
Awesome.
So imagine having everybody have to mute and unmute themselves. It's gonna be a little challenging.
Yeah, no, we're totally in your hands. That's great.
Of course, I'm here to help.
I think, my hope is to make it sort of as within that, 50, 62 people, whatever, as natural as possible. But however you make it work will be awesome.
Oh, you got it.
And one other question. Do you guys want to is there an email list, distribution list that this goes to?
We have several, actually.
So I think one thing one thing you might want to say, Rob, or I'm happy to say, is like, for people who want to hear about more of these things, that they could sign up, they should send you their email, or I don't know what they want to do to sign up for the list, if you want to give them that instruction.
I think, maybe we can give my email so I can collect them.
Okay.
Yeah,
We can put that in the chat. And then is this being recorded, or is this?
Yes, it is.
So,
okay.
Okay. And then, so the last thing I was going to say before I let Rob pile in, so that I just sent my thoughts, but you all are 100% the experts, not me. So I want to be like as out of the way as I can and let you all go and sort of guide and ask questions where necessary. But you all should get into it with each other. Don't you be you and guide us, and I'll be happy to adapt and pick up the pieces wherever is useful.
Cool. Dominica, I have just those two slides up in case it's easier for me to share, or if you want to share. I just thought it'd be good to do the graphic at least. That's probably the most.
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, I think because we want to do a little level setting,
Yeah.
So Rob, you're going to start us off and just sort of do a welcome and a bit about today and whatever.
I'm just gonna give sort of a little history of the thing and explain to the people who usually come for a very different kind of seminar what we're doing today. And then I'm gonna turn it over to you, Colin. I'll let everybody introduce themselves and or I'll let you run it however you want.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I'm not going to introduce you all, Adrian and Ellu. I'm going to ask you to just say, who you are, what you do, why you do it, that kind of thing to start us off. Cool. Let's most importantly have fun. I mean,
Yeah,
serious.
let's have some fun.
It's obviously super serious topic. This is what I think of as serious fun. You might as, it's life and death. We got to go in and try to enjoy ourselves, or else we might as well just jump off a bridge. So let's inspire some folks and each other.
So Dominica, are we ready to go?
Yes, it's recording. I will wait, we have people coming in still.
Okay.
Give it a couple.
Yeah, we'll get a couple of minutes.
So they can, Dominica, just a question. So they can only put in Q&A?
They can raise their hand and I can allow them to speak because we have a lot of people. Yeah.
The reason I was going to do it, I was going to ask, maybe this is stupid with this bigger crowd. I was just going to ask them to introduce themselves, to say, where they work, where they're from, something like that, just so that we had a sense of the room and where people were coming from.
When people speak, you mean?
I was thinking just to have it in, when it's a chat, I would have just done it in the chat, just so that Adrian and Ellu know where, geographically and professionally where, if the crowd is mostly scholars, mostly community folks, mostly policy, whatever. But I don't know if it works on with this setup.
Yes, it does. I'm going to send an answer to everybody right now.
Okay.
Can they hear us?
Yes.
So I think we could start.
Sorry, you go, Rob.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Rob McConnell, and I'm a professor here at USC. This is ordinarily a career development seminar for junior investigators that we've expanded now to host a seminar series called Be Heard. It's sponsored by 2 NIH centers here at USC, and it falls broadly under science communication to make the work that we do on the academic side more useful, with an important twist, and that's that we want to teach academics and community partners together how to work together to have more impact still from the work that we do. And we have this is the second of the series. It's about speaking to policymakers, and we have an exciting lineup here that'll be sort of how to speak to policymakers, but with a sort of very much a focus on ports, which coincidentally is a major area of interest of our two speakers. So we'll be sure that you're on other announcements for topics as they come up. Everything from how to speak with lawyers or to work with lawyers to preparing an op-ed or a policy brief. So with that introduction, I'm going to turn this over to our moderator, Colin McClay from the USC Annenberg School of Communication. Welcome, Colin.
Thanks so much, Rob. Great to be here with you all. I'm definitely the non-expert of the group. So I'm going to be a proxy to ask stupid questions to our panelists today, but I'm really excited about this conversation. We have two really great, informed, deeply experienced folks here for you today, and Adrian Martinez and Ellu Nasser. I think we're going to have a great conversation. So Dominica has invited you to put your names and kind of where you work, where you're from, into the chat, just to give everyone in the room a sense of who's here, and Ellu and Adrian. The aim for the day is we're going to have kind of a back and forth conversation, as Rob noted, sort of focusing on ports. And what I want to do is ask you to start over the course of the conversation, just because there's so many people here, to just drop your questions and your insights. And no doubt there's a lot of knowledge in the room, the virtual room, into the chat. Or the Q&A, I guess, as appropriate. And then in the kind of latter part of it, we'll actually go to questions. And hopefully, Rob, you'll also help monitor the chat Q&A and, kind of bring things that are in the moment into the conversation. And hopefully we'll be a bit freewheeling. So as folks observe things, don't hesitate to reach out and be heard, as it were. So super excited to talk about ports as really high impact, high potential, high need case for engagement among advocates, policymakers, scholars, companies, right? These are really influential kind of entities within our communities. We're going to spend a lot of attention on LA and Long Beach, but also excited to bring in other ports around the country: Houston, Corpus Christi, Oakland, Baltimore, others as appropriate, to see how this plays out more broadly across the country. And I think, as a non-expert in ports, but someone who's a bit of a transportation nerd, I'm especially interested in this conversation because I think that it sort of shows just about everything that makes sustainability and environmental justice, technological change, and regulation so complex and so important, right? We're really at a moment where there's a lot of change going on. And part of that's because it really invokes all sectors of society. The policy and regulatory regime is insanely complex. There's big labor and economic considerations for individuals and communities, and of course, direct and profound implications on health and wellness. So what I want to do to start with is just really by asking Adrian and Ellu to kind of briefly introduce themselves and what they do and how they came to this work, and then we'll dive into the ports. So Ellu, do you want to start us off?
Sure, I'm happy to. Thank you, Rob and Colin and everybody at the USC team for inviting me. I really feel like I'm hopeful this is a joint exchange of learning. I came to the ports work. Actually, Andrea Ricco is on the webinar. She is someone who I define as my mentor. When I first moved to Long Beach, I'd been in Long Beach for one day, and she took me for a tour, kind of a quick and dirty tour of the Port of LA and Port of Long Beach. And I was completely blown back by how the size of those operations and the proximity to local populations and where people were living, including where I was living at the time. And I think just sort of seeing the inequities in vivo, just right in that moment, really sort of sprung me into developing a deep passion about working on these issues and on these topics. And I did care about climate change issues and air pollution issues before, but I think just the connection that ports have, and I think as we go on in this conversation, hopefully that will become more clear for those who are not familiar with these topics, really about, past racist land use decisions. That's really where this, where ports are enabling themselves to continue to expand sort of under those past regimes. I think the other thing I want to mention is that, this work is not, my engagement in this work is not about me. I'm grateful to be part of this discussion, but I think in all the work I've done, I've really seen my role as being able to uplift the voices of community leaders who are directly impacted by port operations writ large, and hopefully using my skills to provide any technical expertise just along that whole process. So I'll turn it to Adrian.
Hi, my name is Adrian Martinez. I'm a deputy managing attorney at Earthjustice, and I'm based in Los Angeles. I've been doing air quality work for the last 2 decades. I got my start where one of the original, I think, lawyers who worked on port pollution, Gail Ritterman-Fuhrer, started giving me assignments. My first assignment was to try to prevent Volkswagen diesel cars from being sold in California. We were initially successful, and then eventually we lost, and we kind of know where that landed with a bunch of cheating that happened. But I think those kind of early experiences with corporations and entities that cheated, and the people who lost most are people who breathe, the people who are near ports and rail yards and whatnot. But yeah, early on, I engaged a lot in port work, mainly as a lawyer. So I tended to go to court to challenge projects, appeal projects, but I get to work with a lot of great folks, including many folks on the panel today, a lot of folks who have spent a lot of time working on this area and who are real experts as well in these topics. But yeah, I think, I just want to, be a counterweight to the heavily lawyered freight industry that really pushes back when people say you should not poison and make people sick.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. Well, as you can see, people are starting to introduce themselves. It's a great, really interesting room, lots of different kind of geographic background and professional backgrounds. And so one of the things I wanted to do is just to start with sort of maybe kind of setting the table and giving people kind of a 101 on ports and why they matter and why they matter, why we're concerned about them, what the possibility is. So I know, Ellu, maybe you want to start us. So you have a couple slides. I don't know if you want to throw those up.
Sure, I'm happy to.
And just to really talk, like, let's get at climate impact, health, financial stuff, how they, whatever the regulatory bits, anything that you all can kind of just to start to kind of level set, so the room has a sense of the, the kind of challenge and opportunity space.
Sure, and Dominica, I can't actually share my screen, so if you are able to pull up the slides or give me privileges, that would be great. I'm the co-host. I can do that now.
You're driving.
Privileges. Can you all see this?
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
And I realized just launched right in, this topic is incredibly exciting to me. I neglected to mention that I'm based in Austin, Texas. I started my work in Long Beach and LA, and have been living in Texas for the last 8 or 9 years. For those who are based in California, I think my experience in coming to Houston, working on the Port of Houston and the Port of Corpus Christi is really like, I describe it as Port of LA and Long Beach in the early 2000s. So I'm sort of back in the work in a different way in the state of Texas. I just wanted to level set a little bit, and we'll try not to get too deeply in the weeds for those who are unfamiliar with the topic, but I think I love this graphic. We borrowed this from Arup, and we use this a lot in our work to just kind of explain both the challenges and the opportunities that ports represent, really as being potential decarbonization hubs. And you can see, I mean, there's the multi-modes of transportation that, really involve our entire supply chain. So you see the ocean-going vessels that come in, the cranes that operate landside and removing the boxes or the containers off of the back of these ships. And then there's cargo handling equipment that's, moving them either to a truck or a train if there's on-dock rail, and then they go either to a warehouse or, directly out of the region. And each of those moves typically is a diesel engine, which is, then an air pollution source locally. And so the negative side of that story is that there's a ton of pollution coming from each piece of this chain, but the positive is the potential that there is to, influence the air pollution, the local and regional air pollution by decarbonizing or moving towards a zero emission technology for each piece of this puzzle. And so, I don't know that I have to say, but it's worth mentioning, of course, that ports and their proximity to local communities represent a huge environmental and public health impact. And, I just am looking at the chat for those who are engaging directly in this work. There's a lot of concern about environmental justice, but it extends beyond air pollution. It includes things like noise and light and blight. All the trucks that are barreling through local neighborhoods are, destroying local roads. So that's a problem for cities in terms of reinvestments they have to make time and time again to keep roads up. And so the issue is really larger than just air pollution, although air pollution is a big part of the puzzle. I think the last kind of level set piece that's worth mentioning, and sorry, this is just a bunch of data, but I think what I want to say here is that this is a really incredible opportunity and time in history between the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law. There's $20 billion for ports to move towards decarbonization. And these are just some of the programs. Actually, I just noticed on Thursday, the Diesel Emission Reduction Act program out of the EPA just got a big tranche of money as well. So this is an underrepresentation of what's kind of currently out there. So I think there's a real opportunity here. The time is now for us to sort of deeply engage and ensure that this money is spent in the way that we want. But one of the things that we've been doing in our work, and I should have mentioned at the outset as well, that in my role at the Environmental Defense Fund, I work really closely with community organizations in 4 communities, Baltimore, Oakland, Houston, and Corpus. And our role is both in elevating those community voices and ensuring that those community stories about the impacts are elevated, but also that information is communicated back up to these agencies who are overseeing these funds. And so I think, Adrian, when we were kind of prepping for the session, really aptly described those monies as sort of our dollars, and the R being, community organizations and all the advocates who have really been fighting to ensure that there's money for this transition. But I think we're really at this precipice. The money could be, misallocated and misspent, or it could be, spent in the right ways to start to get at some of the problems we're seeing. Hopefully that provided some level setting for the port stuff.
That was like the whole course in like 5 minutes. Awesome. So that like kind of tees up lots of other things, but I don't know, one thing maybe you want to bring in, Adrian, is a bit on the policy and regulatory side, as just sort of like that, a bit of that complexity. And then what I want to tee up basically for the next thing is like how we make, you said there's a lot of our money on the table. There's a big opportunity to make a difference. So to get into what that looks like, how do we actually do that? And, what are your experiences? But maybe, yeah, Adrian?
Yeah, so I'll just start by some good news and bad news, and I'll start with the bad news. So there are a lot of people who are active in this port space at the federal, state, and local level. And the bad news is there's a double standard, in my opinion. The freight industry can come in there and they're not held to high standards of data rigor in the arguments they're making. In fact, they can make the arguments that, hey, if you think about requiring us to clean up, there's going to be economic apocalypse, the ports are going to crumble into the sea, and locusts are going to come, invade your city or whatever. And generally, the industry has been very good in developing a web of folks who are making these arguments. You've got the individual companies who are making these arguments. You've got the coalition of those companies who are making these arguments. And in LA, we have this kind of mind-blowing thing where we have business coalitions of coalitions who make it. So it's like an actual coalition that represents business coalitions, which is out there basically making the argument that it's okay as we move freight that people are getting poisoned, they're getting sick and dying. So that's the bad news, is people generally don't check their arguments and don't actually look at the fact that we have record volumes coming through ports of LA and Long Beach, and don't kind of really push them. So on the flip, advocates, there's always this heightened standard. So, when we present evidence on zero emissions, on the health impacts, there's this really tendency to check the work to make sure it's good. Now, the good news is the evidence is on our side. We know a lot about air pollution. And the one thing that I've been kind of consistently amazed at over the last 2 decades of doing this, and a lot of it is the benefit of our researchers at universities like USC and UCLA and other places, is it's not that we're annually getting information that says, oh, you know what, air pollution wasn't as bad as we thought. In fact, it's the opposite. We keep getting information, air pollution is worse. It's worse for all sorts of categories of folks that we should be protecting: children, the elderly, people who are expecting children. So the kind of evidence is mounting that the health imperative is great. And so the good news is the information we're presenting is accurate, it's rigorous, it's strong. On the technological side, there's also this kind of double standard where the industry can say it's not going to work, and people will take that at face value. Oh, my operations are so unique, and I have all this unique stuff that no one has ever thought about how I have to carry my container from this point A to point B, and it's, you know, I could never do it zero emissions. And so so we have to kind of push harder and harder for regulations, for incentives and other things to kind of make that case. The good news is, you know, you look at the evidence, and I was talking yesterday at a meeting at the port. It's like, even in the last decade, you know, there was a moment where we thought, okay, so electrification would only be for bikes and small cars in urban centers. And then all of a sudden it was basically all the cars. And then all of a sudden it was trucks. And then all of a sudden it was cargo equipment. And then you started to think about, oh, we can never do ferries. Oh, but you know what? We could figure this out. And now, just this week, we saw the first battery electric cargo ship take voyage in China. And so I think there's this kind of naysaying from the industry that this is not going to work, you can't do it. And so what it's incumbent upon us is, one, we get to be optimistic on this. We get to be futuristic on technology, but two, we need to just keep saying it. We started talking about zero emissions. I found our first comment letter where we started talking about it seriously in 2006. And so now that work from all these folks along the years, you know, Ellu and all of our, you know, advocates down at the port, actually zero emission probably went before, because shoreside power is zero emissions too. So that was actually even further. So everyone's kind of pushing this, and we got to just keep saying it and saying it, because that's the only way they're ever gonna agree. But yeah, that's just my thoughts on kind of the table setting of this world of freight advocacy, and kind of I think what's a double standard from community advocates, environmental advocates versus the industry itself.
Well,
So
if I could jump in, I was just going to add, I mean, I think the fact is that, you know, for years, folks have been demanding this transition to zero emission technology. And it's always been like, it's too hard and it's too expensive. And now, as you're saying, like the technologies here are emerging and there's the money. And so we really are in this unique place where they've sort of run out of excuses in many ways to lean into this. And then obviously, for folks who aren't familiar, the Biden administration has the Justice 40 initiative, which is the umbrella that overlays all those monies, not including not only the 20 billion, but all of the IRA and IJA monies. And Justice 40 aims to, you know, invest 40% of the benefits, not necessarily the dollars, but ensure that 40% of the benefits of all these funds go to environmental justice communities, which is, again, to echo what Adrian's saying, is a nod to say, we get you, we hear you. Yes, there are disproportionate impacts, air pollution, health effects, et cetera. And I think the good news, bad news, there's a good news, bad news on that as well, which is, one is, I think, you know, some of the work we've been doing in trying to ensure that the funds are being spent in the right way in the ports space. We did a big FOIA request and looked at just one program's grants across the country, and found the Port Infrastructure Development Program, which is one of those 20 billion. That, no surprise, some of the more progressive states had, you know, some of those ports had decent projects coming out. And then the least progressive politically states had a lot of projects that were really just repackaging of the same old thing that they've been doing. And so we've been doing a lot of advocacy at the DOT level, Department of Transportation level, who's in charge of a lot of this money, to say, hey, you've got Justice 40, people have been asking for, specific changes to, business as usual. And we want to see that represented in the grant applications that are coming out. And what we've heard in that engagement a lot of times has been pretty frustrating. Like, they have to move this money, and if they get bad projects, they have to make selections among bad projects. So that's the bad news of it. The good news of that story is that the areas where there's a lot of community engagement and a lot of pushing from advocates, better projects emerge. And I can say, we've been working really hard with the Port of Houston and writing letters of opposition to their bad projects and uplifting projects that are good. And we're seeing a shift. It's very slow, but I think it really represents, DOT has expressed a strong commitment to listening to, community folks on the ground. So there's a lot of power, I think, in influencing the way that those funds are spent.
Yeah, one funny anecdote, I don't know if it's funny, it was actually kind of sad, but after, after decades of being told, hey, this is too expensive, we don't have enough money to do this. I was in a meeting recently with someone who works at the port, and they were complaining that there's just too much money out there for these cleanup programs. And I had to stop them and say, you know what, that's an argument you can't make. If that is the most annoying thing I've ever heard. You can't just say, hey, this is such a pain to apply and get all this money to clean the air in our region and put people to work building the clean energy economy. And so I think we really need to call these folks on it. And one thing with the Inflation Reduction Act and these other provisions, we need to remind these port officials, these federal government agencies, those provisions weren't there because the industry was clamoring for money. Those are there because people stood up, talked to their legislators. The $3 billion for port pollution reductions from that EPA will be administrating, that started with advocates and community residents talking to Congressional Representative Barragan. She started that process of how will we do this. I think a lot of the other programs, they're not the industry's programs. These are our programs. I think all tax dollars are our tax dollars and they need to use it, but particularly in this case where it was folks in the advocacy community and the environmental justice community and environmental community who got these programs, we need to make sure that they're spending them in a wise way.
So this is great. So you all have both put a whole bunch of stuff on the table, from kind of the communication expertise, kind of power, asymmetry of power that the ports and business community and coalition of coalitions, the house of cards they build to push things through to, kind of cultural barriers within the ports about, what I would call cultural barriers to innovation, like they're just afraid of change, or it's not worth the time or not worth the effort in their estimation, sort of just all these dynamics. And I'm curious if we could get into a little bit of, you just gave us a way in, Adrian. They're pointing out a lot of the, these monies, these resources have come through advocacy. So in some sense, right, communities have created the resources to be able to make the change. But then there's the question of what mixture of change within the port strategies, how do they see opportunity, regulatory pressure, right? Where are they getting pressure to make actual change? How does the EPA or any of the other tapestry of regulatory agencies or policy considerations drive them to make change? And then the third piece is sort of the money. How does that, what kind of incentives are there, and how are those monies actually administered such that they do achieve the goals that the community organizations had in the first place, as opposed to just, making the ports more profitable, which, I don't think that's fine, but not at the expense of community health and wellness, right? So where do you see, like, what have you seen as the kind of the modes and strategies to tactics for engagement to sort of where we as a community of advocates from the community, people who are very, close to this on the ground, who have real standing, scholars who can kind of complement community researchers and community scholars and community members with knowledge and impartial, analysis. So how do we engage? What have you done that's been effective? How can you help us think about that?
Yeah, so a couple thoughts. One is, and this is definitely the case for California, ports, I assume it's maybe different in other ports, but probably similar, is these are our ports. They're kind of for us. And so this notion of profit gets abused, particularly by the industry. They claim that these ports and these facilities, they need to maximize profit. But if you actually look at what the law says, that's not really what they need to do. They need to maximize benefit. So I think one of the things that has been particularly effective is consistent work from advocates throughout the state, keeping that in mind and identifying what benefits are. It's not just that you move containers in the cheapest way possible. And in fact, we want to, make it cleaner. And that's a valid public purpose. Like there's nothing in the Constitution of California that says to move freight, we have to poison people and make people sick. And so oftentimes the people in charge of these ports, sometimes they're from the industry, but a lot of times they're just regular folks who, might have donated a lot of money and to a mayor or something and got appointed or be prestigious in, some circles, labor circles or business circles. And so they get on it. So these are people who are essentially publicly accountable. And so I think kind of really keeping that in mind, putting pressure on them. I think the other thing is, we've had a lot of debates among advocates in Southern California. There is one thing to be said for just showing up. A lot of times these decisions get made in without public oversight or review. And the more we can kind of open it up, democratize these ports, the better. Because I've found that the more they have to justify their decisions and articulate them with people actually listening, it tends to be helpful, although it can be frustrating. And then the final point I want to make, one thing is in this work, one of the, I think, frustrating things is, our ideas will get appropriated by the ports, and so they will kind of erase the advocates from it. And I go back and forth. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. It's not about credit, but I think the problem is when they erase the advocates, as we move forward to further and more difficult challenges, they kind of think, oh, we don't need the advocates and the ideas, the community to figure out how to solve these problems. So I think we need to make sure that, we're reminding them that the good stuff happened because people fought hard. They spent tens of thousands of hours on this, and then probably even hundreds of thousands of hours in a lot of these communities to ask this industry to clean up. And so I think that's kind of an important point. But we've seen point blank where we filed a comment letter in 2019 asking for something and giving a recommendation. And just recently the ports are like, hey, we came up with this great idea. Will you support it? And it was like, well, yeah, that was kind of the idea that the community advocates came up with, and now you're appropriating it. So
I mean, what I hear in that is, one, of course, you want good ideas incorporated, but that is sort of like a one-off. That ends up being like a one-off, where we'll grab a good idea where we like it, as opposed to seeing community as a valuable resource that is not only, or that is not purely oppositional, that is pushing for improvements and that is going to surface real path to joint gains, right? And so it seems like that narrative to say, like, that's a source of real insight for what we could do better is important.
Yeah, and I think we've seen, and especially in the LA side, Port of LA side, we've seen a movement away from engagement of the public and trying to create a more insulated decision making structure. And I think that gets problematic. I mean, I think one of the hard things with these ports is they're very sensitive. And so when you're critical of them, it hurts their feelings. And so they don't want to
disloyal as opposed to constructive.
And they don't want to talk to you. And I think one of the things we need to make clear, and my partner is very much like let's embrace confrontation, resolve it, and move on. I think that's probably the better strategy here. They're going to be tough conversations, but it's better to have them and have that difficult discussion than just kind of reverting back to hanging out in your echo chamber and kind of, and creating that tension. And so I hope we can kind of explain to the ports that, look, it is tough to hear from people who think that they shouldn't be poisoned to move an iPhone. That is a difficult conversation, but it's worth having, and it's important information that they need to figure out how do they continue to operate in a way that doesn't poison people and make them sick.
So, I mean, taking us to these kind of big grants that are out there, it strikes me, I mean, my reaction to what you're just saying here is I would much rather have those insights from the community, both, the pain points and the opportunity points, before I submit or implement that $2 billion, like that massive investment, right? It's because ostensibly it could make my proposal stronger, right? There are going to be, there are going to be gains where you make sacrifices, and there may just be gains, or you make investments. But, ideally in their proposal process, and this, I don't know if this is reasonable expectation or not, that those co-benefits are part of evaluation of the proposal, right? Of that grant process. So I'm curious and I think I'm aware that ports may, they do all kinds of things to sort of frame their work as low impact, and whether it's just considering just what happens at the port and not what happens in transshipment, or otherwise of spinning it. What kind of resources, what have you done, and how do you see communities engaging? And Ellu, you mentioned FOIA, Freedom of Information Act requests to even get access to proposals, but what does that part look like? Because clearly money is a real opportunity here, unlike any other. So are there ways into that process to kind of improve what's being funded and how they're, approaching it?
Yeah, we've been approaching this in as systematic a way as possible. One, we spend a lot of time educating ourselves on these different programs. And I mean, I've talked to everybody I can at DOT, all the way up to the undersecretary, to understand, like, what are you actually looking for in these grants? And then I've, packaged that information and done as much as I can to sort of elevate everybody's understanding of these different programs and where the opportunities for pressure are. Specifically in Oakland, my colleague who leads our work in Oakland, and then the work in Baltimore and Houston, we have regular meetings with the port and with our community partners. We identify specific projects that the communities want to see funded. We have actually hired consultants like traffic engineers and other folks that do things that I cannot do, to write up sections of these grants and insert them into the port's grant applications, acknowledging that it's a little bit of a community benefits agreement because they're going to be expanding their port in that next application, but hopefully they're electrifying in that process. And then we're doing some sort of off-port impacts. Amazingly, this process of kind of continually pressuring the ports, they're not making the connection that their project proposal, as DOT has communicated to us, it will score higher. If they incorporate these pieces, they're going to get a higher score and they're going to get funded. And so I think the first year of funding, really all this effort fell on deaf ears. The port, especially the Port of Houston, just submitted their repackaged projects and we got nowhere. This next round of grants, we've had a little bit more progress, but it is, as Adrian was saying, they've been a lot of really uncomfortable conversations where we said, you're not getting this, you're not understanding where, what the intention of this money really is. And I think, it's really complicated stuff. Unfortunately, the way that DOT evaluates projects, each project has to demonstrate that they have to do a benefit cost analysis, and they have to demonstrate that they're cost effective because they're tax dollars. And, to Adrian's point, the numbers are always really fuzzy. It's a little bit like, we're going to divert all this traffic from this other place. And so we're going to capture those air quality benefits. And so our project is a net zero or net positive. And so a lot of that math gets really fuzzy, and especially when these projects are evaluated in isolation, and then they're not thinking about the spill-off effects off port property. There's just a lot of problems with the ways that these things are really being implemented. So we spend a lot of time, educating community, working with community to elevate their concepts, educating DOT, frankly. And then our sort of next effort is to work as closely as we can with the WEJAC, the White House Environmental Justice Committee committee to really, we have a memo, we're trying to help them help us elevate the issues with the benefit cost analysis process so that the next tranche of funding that comes out doesn't have these sort of systemic problems. But yeah, there's a lot of problems. And I just would say, you know, Texas is very different than California. Feelings are very big. And I think that it's taken us a long time just to get a seat at the table. And often the seat at the table is, you know, we get a notice about a grant going in on, you know, on a Monday, hey, can we get a letter of support by Wednesday? And we get just a graphic describing what's a, you know, $10 million project or something. And so we've been working really hard to help them understand that that's not meaningful community engagement. We need to be at the table from the beginning.
I mean, just between what you are saying and the chat, it seems like there are one from Janet talking about California ports and the being governed by the California State Lands Commission with sort of ostensible protective obligation, really just protecting the ports, and from Kathleen talking about, you know, basically legal strategies for intervention. So these are, you know, fundamental. Like on one hand, you have like an institution that's kind of broken, not doing its job. And then in others, kind of not unlike what you said in Texas, that you kind of have to force your, you know, it's either kind of developing some rapport or forcing your way in through legal or other kinds of aggressive strategies. And it just, that seems like that's a rough dynamic, right? That takes a lot of effort, a lot of resources to actually make change, when in some ways what you're talking about is actually helping them out. And I wonder, you know, is there, you know, and you also mentioned, Ellu, sort of getting in at the proposal level to make sure that the way that the cost benefit analysis and other elements of the application process are supportive of the goals more broadly. So, I mean, seems like there's interventions all along the chain. And I guess the question is what does it look like for us to make those more systematic, to share knowledge? How do we kind of have more impact, recognizing that the ports have massive and soon to be more massive resources, whereas the advocacy community, even though it's created a lot of those resources, is still, you know, our time and monies are pretty scarce. Adrian, did you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, Kathleen pointed out that a lot of port advocates are, I mean, it's doing it for free or on the side. It's like, I think we need to encourage our philanthropic institutions to build up more institutions in the harbor that can battle with these large corporations, these large interests that are pushing this. Because, you know, Janet put the kind of how we're supposed to, you know, manage our coastal resources in the chat, and it's out of whack. And I think making those arguments is hard when there's hundreds of people that are paid by the industry to kind of make the opposite argument that, hey, we're not promoting commerce enough. And it's like, I was just down at the port of Long Beach yesterday, and it's like, it's absurd, these arguments, but they get to make them and don't get checked except by the community advocates. And so this is where I think the research and technical piece is really important. And, you know, because I think one of the strategies that port authorities and these other agencies do, they want people to be demoralized. They want them to feel like their voice doesn't matter. And yeah. I think we push back at that, and we push back. But one of the things we need are folks from the scientific community, the academic community, to come in and just kind of say, what's up? Here's what this research says, and be able to communicate it in a compelling way and connect it to their conduct. Because a lot of times what we've seen is, you know, these are people who don't want to feel like they're harming people, but you kind of have to present that information because that's what's happening. And just kind of be that entity that presents the information that helps for community advocates and others who are trying to push for cleanup.
Well, we're fortunate to have lots of really interesting sounding scholars in the room right now. And to me, you know, obviously scholars need money, they need access, they need guidance as to where to put their, you know, those tools. So if you all, I mean, I'd love to, I think people would be interested, and Elizabeth asked this as a question, like, where can we make a difference? What does it look like? How do people know where to engage and how, you know, can you give guidance or experiences that you've had where, you know, productive collaborations between community advocates, community researchers, and university types to give us some models or ways to think about that constructive engagement that you were just discussing?
I can talk a little bit about our work in Texas. I mean, I want to elevate what Adrian said a little bit ago, which is a lot of times it's just about showing up. And that means both, like, it's surprising how few people come to Port Harbor Commission meetings, and you can learn a lot just by being there. And there's a lot of real quick, like, this is not making sense conversation happening that you don't have to have a PhD after your name to immediately say, like, this isn't quite square. So there's a lot of opportunity there. And I think our work in Texas is really focused on, our scientists are working directly with local community organizations to develop environmental justice action plans. And those action plans are really the basis around which we identify impacts, and then, you know, can write up those, like, as I was mentioning, those community priorities. So if a specific community is talking about, you know, truck traffic in a certain way, we can help design a rerouting plan and elevate that into these grant proposals. So I would just, and I think this, so the showing up part is both on the commission side, but also on the community side. I think we have, I'm new to the team and I'm 4 years into our team in Texas, but our lead researcher has been there for 16 years, just continuing, you know, to hold hands with folks and be engaged on the ground level and just sort of offer support when we can.
Yeah, the one thought I have is, I think one thing that's been particularly great is when research institutions can take the time and effort to bring the science to advocates and community. And so Andrea, Rob, USC team, they spent a lot of time doing that. And that's been really important because, well, you know, I said it's great to have the scientists come testify, and that's awesome. And y'all should come to every Harbor Commission, every meeting and testify. You can have 10x the impact of your research and your science if you have folks communicating it. And so I think that's the really kind of important thing, that a lot of the you know, kind of converting the science into popular education. You know, I can fortunately had to learn how to read some of these scientific articles, but I'm probably not the best. I'm just a lawyer. But you know, kind of the effort to convey this information so that it's understandable, fact sheets, these types of things, I think are great and really effective. One thing I would be talking, you know, because I work with a lot of my staff and kind of how do you communicate to these officials. So there's a couple ways. One is I encourage folks to ask for meetings with harbor commissioners and whatnot. And then it's just more of a conversation. A lot of times they will meet to discuss issues. Whether they listen, that's a separate question, but you know, so that's one. The other thing is meetings. And so those are a little bit more rigid, but they can be very effective ways to participate. Generally, kind of how it works is there's some agenda item, or there's even open public comment. A lot of times you're limited in the amount of time you can provide. So you're providing 3 minutes of testimony. My recommendation to folks as they're presenting is, one, introduce yourself, tell who you are. So I'm a scientist, or I'm a PhD student, or I'm a community member, so that they get context who you are. I encourage you up front to articulate why you're there and what you're talking about. Can you summarize in one sentence what you're here? I'm here to support this project or oppose this project. I'm here to present you information on how diesel pollution from ships impacts asthma, or whatever that is. Then go into kind of the meat of your discussion. Here's what we did, here's the evidence, or here's why I support or oppose. And then I encourage always at the end, summarize again, just because, you know, the folks are human, they get distracted. Sometimes they're on their iPads or they're phone. So make sure that, you're kind of really creating. And, I think testifying, I always think sometimes we're not good about saying what we think and the discussion we have internally. It's important to kind of present that out into the world. So that's just some thoughts of that. And then the other kind of one recommendation I have for my team is always just to practice. You can practice in the mirror, you can practice with your grandma, with your partner, your colleague, your boss, whatever. So you always practice. I think also helps kind of because even I get nervous when I'm testifying in front of these folks because they're all staring at you.
Those are great points, Adrian. I just wanted to add one thing that came to mind, which is in the last couple of years, I feel like I've become more bold in just calling people up or reaching out to folks within, key agencies. I mentioned we've had 4 or 5 meetings with the undersecretary at DOT, and I just thought, I'll just email him and see what happens. And, you get a response. These are public agencies. They work for us. We just organized a meeting with the head of the Army Corps of Engineers who came down to Houston and saw some of the community impacts we've been, making a lot of noise about. And so it requires persistence, but I think especially, the academic voice, I think integrating that into the asks, and a lot of times our letters are sort of community partners and our organization and maybe a lawyer or a lead scientist to help sort of make the case that Adrian's saying, like that whole picture. But it's pretty surprising they will, get back to you eventually.
Yeah, I mean, I think as Janet has pointed out here, this community collaboration with educational institutions and public organizations is crucial to these changes, right? And I think in my someone who's at a university, in my mind, like that's the holy grail is, can we have impartial, scholarship, rigorous scholarship connect with community connected dialogue to engage and guide our policymakers and other organizations. In at least ideally speaking. And I guess I wonder in practice, to just build on Janet's observation, how, for maybe junior scholars or folks who are newer to this field or newer to the space of ports, do you have recommendations on how to figure out how people can be useful, whom to connect with, how to connect? Like, one is like testimony. I'm an expert on X and I can tell you that, this kind of air quality leads to this, like Rob can tell you. Another is a PhD student or junior scholar who says, if you give me access to this data, I can actually do an analysis of something, right? Like I can really work it out. So do you have guidance on how folks in that, newer to the field can engage and be supportive of this work?
Yeah, I mean, just as Ella was talking about reaching out to like undersecretaries, I think reaching out to advocates, community groups. One, I think you're going to find you're going to get 10 times more from that interaction than they probably are going to get as you're presenting your science, just because there's just immense knowledge and understanding, and we have some of the real pioneers in port advocacy and freight advocacy in Southern California, people who've been at it for decades. So I think that's one important thing, and just kind of, try to integrate into these networks. The one thing I will say is folks are busy because they're, the freight industrial complex doesn't sleep. It promotes project after project after project. So, you might not get response back, or you might take you a little bit of time, but that's okay. Sometimes, recognizing that folks who are working for free to push back on, some of the most powerful industries in the world, it might take a minute to get back to you, but, just be persistent and, try to engage. And I think this is the last point, and one of the things working with some of our clients, this is good for lawyers as well, is be very, very respectful of people's time, recognizing that, there's just a lot on people's plates. So, try to, really think about that as we're kind of engaging. So, but yeah, there's some great people just even probably in the chat, if you could.
Well, there are some great people in the chat, and you just referenced sort of the kind of hotbed of longstanding work in this region. And we had a great conversation with Sylvia, who's here the other day, about these networks. And I wonder if just with Ellu and Adrian, and also Sylvia and Moses and others in the chat, if you could maybe just surface some of the networks for people to keep an eye out for, reach out to kind of, if they're motivated, and I hope some people will be, to kind of figure out where to even start.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the best networks on any issue out there is the Moving Forward network. It's just really an immense collaboration among people all over the country working to clean up the freight industry and advance zero emissions. So, and then there's some regional kind of groups that are kind of the subgroups there. So the Impact Project is the Southern California group. I think there's an awesome collaborative up in the Bay Area. That's a lot of the groups. I think West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project, Earthjustice, Environmental Defense Fund, Pacific Environment, amongst a lot of other folks. So if you're up to that way, that's a great group. Obviously, you're around Texas, you got to talk to Ellu. So I don't know if they,
Yeah.
some other folks.
We look to Texas for strategies that we want to carry out to the Gulf. I would say folks out here are really even more under-resourced, and there's just less folks working on the issues. So there are little coalitions that have formed in each of the major cities, but I'll say my experience in reaching out to, when we did that Freedom of Information Act on the Ports Infrastructure Development Program, and we found that the Port of Beaumont's project was going to cause huge environmental injustices in a specific neighborhood. We just called up this community advocate, and he was so excited to have support and someone listening and paying attention. He's on his own out there doing all this work. So the Gulf is highly under-resourced. I know there's a lot of efforts to try to link up, the ports in Louisiana and Texas, and try to have some sort of more concerted efforts to do work collectively, given the fact that we're pushing a big boulder up a hill over here.
So, Colin, I'm looking. There's Jessica Dark has her hand up, and Dominica, can we? How do we do that?
Yes, I can let her allow her to speak.
Yeah, perfect.
How did you even see that? That's awesome. Jessica. Oh, it was left over from earlier. Okay. Well, we just have a couple minutes left. So one, I just want to underscore any final questions or observations, comments from the chat, which have been kind of lots of great points, including, and Sylvia just put in the Impact Project. I dropped in Moving Forward. I think Dominica is going to put her email in there in case people want to sign up to be on the mailing list for future events like these. I guess maybe Robbie, you want to say a bit about this. I feel like your group really is a place where a lot of community researchers and advocates are connecting with scholars, ideally for impact, particularly around the port, as kind of another kind of convening point that, to invite people who are curious about continuing this conversation to engage further. I don't know if you want to say anything about that, Rob.
No, I just say, this series, I think, is an important thing that we're doing. At least I hope it'll become important. And this is a bit of an experiment for us, for the folks on the people who've registered. We'll be sure to send you notices as we have additional panels. And I think we're all learning how to do this. I think this is for the folks on the academic side at USC. This meeting happens every week, this career development seminar for the junior investigators. And I think maybe a good idea for us would be to discuss at our next meeting, how we could engage further based on the experience that we've had here, and how we might reach out to the Impact Project and the Moving Forward network in a way that would provide opportunities for junior folks and allow them to to connect with some of the great people who are, who are on this call, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a kind of a budding movement and also interconnection among a bunch of us at USC who are eager to do meaningful, generative, respectful, community engaged scholarship in ways that universities don't typically do it, which is to say a real partnership with community advocates and community researchers and community-based organizations where, the folks who are most affected are driving the conversation, and we're learning from you all as opposed to the ivory tower thinking that we have all the knowledge. So there's that. I hope there's really kind of a rolling thunder of a more sustained conversation. And I feel like in the many of the observations that Ellu and Adrian made today, there's something about scale, right? We have this kind of patchwork responding in an asymmetrical way to these really big challenges. And so we're always going to be limited in terms of resources, and we need to figure out how to organize ourselves and to share knowledge in more effective ways to be able to really respond in ways that have impact. And I think the collaboration among these communities feels like one really great resource. I note that Jessica asks here, like, are the decision makers like unaware of the research? They don't get it. They don't buy it. Like they don't give a, like that dynamic of like, well, clearly there's research out there and there's bad decisions. So there's a gap. And then there's lots more research that that is then maybe in the community, but not coming out, not, sort of scholarly approved, by the academy. So lots of gains to be made as well. But I think you've given us some really great insights as to how ports work into the beginnings of the opportunity and the challenge in front of us there, and also really just like the time is now. I mean, that was my big takeaway: is the time is now. There's still opportunity to affect how those monies are spent and how they're both how they're allocated and how they're used. There's kind of storytelling in terms of everything from how we drive and force change to how we encourage and support ports to make change. So I guess I just really want to say thank you for sharing all this. And I don't know, I mean, we're already 2 minutes over, so I'm reticent to go any further, but I do want to invite Ellu and Adrian, any final words or reflections you have or anything else you want to share?
I think Kathleen had a great recommendation in the chat. It's make sure that when we're meeting with ports, there's a broad coalition there. I think that's good. But yeah, it's been good presenting today, and I think there's few areas that are more important to our health to participate than this, and so we need a lot of people to be engaged, and hopefully we can make a lot of progress.
Yeah, and I'll just end by saying it's astounding how much progress can be made with, sometimes it's a couple community representatives and an advocate and an academician, and you're surprised that you feel sometimes like you're disrupting the entire supply chain, the way things can sometimes be characterized. But I think there's so much potential for impact, and especially with this money on the table. So
that's great. I mean, I really want to thank you for the longstanding work you've both done in this field, because it's precise, like what we've seen in other areas of social change and real progress. It's not that it happens like something changes on a dime. It's that there are typically decades of work, of groundwork laid, and then all of a sudden the change seems fast. It is the classic change is slow until it's fast kind of thing. But when you've laid that groundwork and built some of those strategies and insights, we are positioned to make real progress. So in a moment where it often feels like the sky is falling, this really does put a little bit of a bounce in my step to say, let's roll up our sleeves. And there are lots of, as you both laid out, lots of different places to intervene and lots of great people to be in community with around those interventions. So thank you for your work, and thank you so much for joining today and sharing all those thoughts. And thanks, huge thanks to everyone in the room for the great comments and insights that you all shared, and to Rob and Dominica for organizing us.
Thank you all. Thanks, Colin.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.